Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Shadows Podcast. I'm joined today by Oleg Lougheed. He was adopted in Russia at the age of 12, and through the Hands Across the Waters International Adoption Program. More than a decade later, he's doing some amazing things. He's a motivational speaker. I heard him on a TEDx talk. In 2017, he founded a nonprofit organization and has an amazing podcast called Overcoming Odds. Oleg, thank you very much for being here today with us on Shadows Podcast.
No, thank you. And thank you for being a guest on ours as well, which will be probably released at the same exact time as this one.
Yeah. So nice little trade-off here. So before we get started, I got a couple of quick rapid fires for you.
Sure.
First, what area of your life are you never satisfied with?
That is a great question. Not so rapid anymore, right? I would say relationships. And what I mean by that is that they're always a work in progress. Right now at this chapter of my life, I'm focusing on frequency, developing a frequency within relationships, because if there's anything my experience has taught me, it is that concept of I'll get in touch with you later or down the road. It's just a never-ending story, and it actually doesn't lead to any form of action, or it hasn't for me. So for me, I try and be concrete as far as, hey, I'm going to get in touch with you next week on Monday at this particular date. So relationships is the thing that I'm working on right now.
Nice. Okay. What do you feel people complain too much about these days?
Turning their dreams into reality. I think one of the things that I've learned throughout my own journey and my own experience, it is knowledge is not power. Knowledge with action is power. Action is a thing that actually manifests those dreams into realities. And that's really what I've learned throughout my journey is, and I used to be that person as well. I used to complain about why are certain things not happening, or I would put very minimal action and expect some of those results to come to fruition. When in reality, I realized over time that some of that action that I'm going to be required to do, like right now, I'll give an example. Part of my speaking career, I literally reach out to 1,000 people a day, 1,000 emails every single day, even Saturday and Sunday. And that is manifesting. But before, I would reach out to 10, 15, 20 people and kind of sit there with my hands crossed and thinking, why is no one calling? Why is no one responding? It's because the outreach is not high enough. So I would say it's true across the board. If you're looking for an agent to publish a book and you may think that certain things aren't happening, increase the numbers. Go from 50 to 100, 100 to 500, 500 to 1,000. I know you and I share this belief as well that everything revolves around energy. Mm-hmm. So amplify the energy. Amplify the number of people that you're reaching out to actually have that thing manifest.
So now that it makes total sense if I send you a message and I don't hear back from you immediately, 1,000 people. I respect that.
A lot to get through. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What are most people afraid of that doesn't scare you?
Fear of the unknown. Fear of what could happen, but sometimes doesn't actually happen.
Yeah.
Fear of the other side. Fear of not knowing how certain things are going to work out. I'm very fortunate to be in this position where I've developed a different relationship with the unknown. It's almost like I don't even think about it anymore.
Yeah.
Or when I do, I start to question myself. Is this just a story I'm telling myself about what hasn't actually happened?
Yeah.
I would face a conflict, let's say with a loved one or a friendship or whatever it is. And I would be sitting there and creating this literally New York Times bestseller in my head. But then in reality, I just have to take a step back and remind myself, and that is this just a story I'm creating? Or asking people for help. That's another one.
Yeah.
But before asking them, telling myself that narrative, what are they going to think of me? Is this going to change the course of our friendship? What are they going to tell to other people after I ask? When the reality of the matter has been, I asked and it was given. That's it.
We tend to overthink so much.
Yeah.
And then
The other three were just like not even existent.
Exactly.
It would be fascinating actually one day to have a conversation with someone and literally tell them all the things that I was thinking prior to an ask or whatever it is, just to compare thoughts.
Yeah.
Like where were they at when they had received the message, and where was I at as I was composing that message?
It never plays out the way we think it in our head. We tend to overthink and paint the worst picture possible. That's one thing. I'm glad you said that, because I've gotten better at that too. I used to think, I used to stress out thinking about tomorrow and the next day and next week and next month. You don't even know what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
But like you said, that New York Times bestseller.
And it's for me, it's been a harder concept to grasp, the whole thing about living in the now.
Mm-hmm.
So in my opinion, I don't know if it's possible to always live in the now. And I think the reason why is because so much of it is built on the future actions and future steps. I mean, literally, even the whole concept of time, it's focused on the next second, the next minute, the next hour. It doesn't just stop and give you the time to think about 11:09 for the next 17 hours. It keeps going. So that's the thing that fascinates me, is in this culture that I'm living in now, what does that even mean to live in the now? Is it really being able to experience just 2 to 3 minutes over a course of a day where I'm able to sit still and just be there and not have to think about the next event, next activity? Because even in the activities, I mean, think about it. When you're working out, how often do you think about the task ahead?
Yeah.
Instead of just solely being there, focusing on that exercise, instead of having to check back at your phone every single time and thinking, man, I got 20 minutes. I got to finish this now. Otherwise, I'm not going to get a chance.
That's true. That's very true. We're always thinking about that next thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess meditation would probably be the closest thing I can think of
and
living for the now.
And that for me, 5 or 10 minutes a day. That's it.
Yeah. That's very valid. If you could try out for a job for a day to see if you liked it, what job would that be?
Navy SEAL.
Ooh, that's a good answer. It seems like you've thought about that one before. That was kind of a quick response.
Navy SEAL. So as I shared with you earlier, I've recently started reading David Goggins' book and kind of listening to his story and the different things that he's been through. And I think even though to a degree it's not necessarily my cup of tea by any means, just because of the mindset and the energy that he approaches certain things with, but just the mentality to be able to actually confront the limitations, the fears, and some of these other things with the approach of, hey, this is a thing I'm struggling. Okay, how can I pave a path towards overcoming it? Mm-hmm. Instead of beating around the bush and not actually acknowledging the problem for what it is. If I have a difficulty waking up every morning and brushing my teeth, instead of like compromising and saying that, well, it's okay, like I still was able to be productive in X, Y, and Z way, but rather just looking at it through the lens of, hey, I'm not brushing my teeth. What can I do differently? How can I change? So that's something that fascinated me. And the other thing that I think would be also interesting to experience is Hell Week.
Yeah.
In fact, if there's anything I could do, I would love to just do that.
Just that.
Yeah, serious. I mean, just the stories that I hear around it and how it challenges you as an individual literally seems like in every possible capacity. Like that fascinates me.
Oh yeah. Mentally,
that really gets me curious. Like, what is the growth that you're able to experience within something like that?
Yeah. Okay. That's a pretty good start. Some good answers to those.
So for any Navy SEALs that are listening to this and that are that would be happy to invite me or sponsor me as part of Hell Week, I'm welcome to that.
I would do it too. I'm not gonna lie. I would do it in a heart. I wouldn't even think about it. I would just be like, yeah, let's go. Yeah. Okay. So
what happens if you quit afterwards? Like after you actually complete the Hell Week?
Never heard from you. Okay. I don't know. That's a good question. So Oleg, for someone who, is listening to this podcast, hasn't caught wind of who you are, tell us a little bit about your upbringing.
Absolutely. Well, for anyone that doesn't know much of my story, and I know you and I had a chance to briefly talk about it, I was born in Russia. And I was born in Russia and had lived there for my first 12 years of my life, had experienced quite a bit of adversity and tragedy during those early years. I was born into a family household where my mom was an alcoholic, my father was in prison, and my sister, who was 18 years older and still is, ended up being my legal guardian. The best way that I could summarize those years was that from a very young age, I felt that I had to forget what it meant to be a child and I had to learn what it meant to be an adult. And it put me on a set of circumstances and a journey where I had to make a lot of very difficult decisions. One of the earliest decisions I can recall was when I was a 9-year-old kid. I remember I was sitting in the same office with my sister standing in the background and a social worker in front of me. And I was put with this decision to give up my parents' rights and go into an orphanage. I'll be completely honest, at the time, I didn't really know what that decision was going to include as far as the consequences afterwards. I just felt that that was going to be a better option for a better future. I didn't understand that by going into an orphanage and living there for the 3 years afterwards, that I wouldn't be able to see my family as often as I wanted to, that there were going to be certain rules and regulations that I had to follow. And if I didn't obey those things, I was going to be punished mentally, physically. But very fortunate to being in that system and living there for 3 years. I was then adopted. As you had mentioned, the adoption agency, Hands Across the Water, was the one that ended up facilitating the adoption between my parents who live in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which I'm actually going back there in 2 weeks. So I'm not fully prepared for the 20-degree weather in full transparency, but I don't think many people are unless you live in a weather like that. So, when I ended up coming here, it was 2005. I was a 12-year-old kid. I barely spoke any English. I knew very little about this part of the world. In fact, the joke that I make nowadays is like the only things that I did know, besides a handful of words, was the name Michael Jordan and that United States was dreamland. Having lived here 15 years, those two probably go in the same sentence. Like I understand it now, what what those two mean. But as I think about my own journey and my own upbringing, the best way that I could summarize it, it has been a journey full of numerous obstacles that I had to find a way to overcome. I had to find meaning within those adversities. And that is why I chose to do the work that I'm doing now. And that is creating a space for other people to be able to reframe their adversities into opportunities, so to speak. And that is, how can you approach an adverse circumstance through the lens of what was it there to teach me? What am I there to learn? I'm a huge believer that life is just a huge learning opportunity. That's it. If there's anything that I could ever do, is just step into it and experience. And that's what ended up happening for me, is I started to step into this space and look at all of these adversities through the lens of what were they there to teach me. And I kid you not, when I started to look at it through that particular lens, my experience shifted completely. I was no longer blaming my circumstances. I was no longer looking at people such as my birth mom as someone who was not capable of taking care of me, who was irresponsible. I was looking at her as someone who, A, not only gave me birth, but B, gave me one of my biggest qualities, and that's the ability to be driven. The message that I share with people is, when I was younger and I used to walk around the streets and I would look for her, and I would come up short 9 times out of 10, sometimes 10 out of 10. But the message I continued to repeat to myself back then is the same message I repeat to myself today. And that is, just go talk to one more person. Go look in one more apartment. You may find her. It's the same exact thing I repeat to myself today. Whenever I receive a no, I just look at it. It's like, not yet. I haven't talked to the right person just yet. That's why the whole concept of reaching out to 1,000 people a day, I don't know the number of no's, FU's, don't ever email me again that I receive, but I just don't take them personally anymore.
Yeah.
because I just know that, okay, I just haven't talked to the right person. Keep going. And after a while, you do find that thing. I do believe that. At
Yeah.
least my experience has been, I can't speak for everyone else, but my experience has taught me is that the more that I chose to put myself out there and the more what I call massive action that I try to do, the higher the chances were of manifesting the life that I've dreamed of.
Yeah. I heard I mentioned at the top your TEDx talk that was from Kent State, correct?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if you haven't had a chance, folks, to check it out, go to YouTube, How to Overcome Your Odds. Oleg goes over his 4 pillars in there as well. It's a phenomenal speech that you get, and it's just full of emotion. You can feel the emotion listening to it. It's a lot different than a lot of the other TEDx talks I've heard where they get up there and they're phenomenal as well. But yours just, I feel it. I feel your emotion as you're talking, and it's just real. But you talked about, because there's so much to unpack based off what you just said. The upbringings in Russia. You talked about the breadcrumbs, the shot glasses, the bed bugs, and you told a story about having to, steal a loaf of bread. That's how tough it was. When was that point where you were like, yeah, I've got to make a change, even as a young kid?
I think the point for me came when, it's a great question. And I don't think there was a single point, but more so, I think a series of points. One of those points was I saw on numerous occasions my mom abused. She was living at the time with her boyfriend. And I remember I would kind of run away from my sisters to go see my mom and then go from my mom back to my sisters. The two of them had a very complicated relationship. And so when I think about those points that were very difficult, but yet were the catalyst for change, it's seeing my mom abused and just feeling internally like enough is enough, but really not being able to do anything about it at that particular age. I mean, I was 4 to 5 to maybe 6 years old, weighed, I don't know, 40, 50 pounds at most. I mean, arms probably the size of a toothpick. So couldn't really do much, when it came to like actually stopping and standing up for her.
Yeah.
But that was one thing that stood out. The whole stealing of my bread, that was a very interesting thing because as anything in life, I think there are certain habits that got developed for me when I was young, and then it became natural behaviors. So a moment of confession here. When I came to the States, one of the things that I did was I actually shoplifted. I did. And I think part of it is because it became a habitual behavior. When I was doing that while I was living in Russia, I had to do that to survive. Now, when I came to the States, I think for the first, I don't know, year or so, couldn't really tell the difference. Like, why am I doing this? It's just one of those things where I'm sure you can relate. You just do certain things because you've done it for so long. And then you have this moment, it's like, wait, why am I doing it this way? Like, what? Who actually said that I had to do it? Some of the kids that I was hanging out with when I came to the States, they used to do the same exact thing. We'll go to a grocery store and take gum and whatever else, candy. And I think part of it also came with the excitement. I think there's also that real sense that when you're young, at least when I was young, that you are invincible. There's no way you're going to get caught. You're untouchable. And so there's that excitement that also comes in, or came in for me, and just wanting to explore it. But for me, to answer your question, it really was a series of those situations where I just had experienced so much and I started to tell myself that enough was enough. I had to change something about it because everyone surrounding me was doing nothing about it. They weren't trying to change the circumstances. And that's where I just decided to take matters into my own hands with whatever I could do, and chose to give up their rights. Once again, didn't really understand what that meant at the time. Didn't know that I wasn't going to be able to see them as often as I wanted. But after a while, I came to terms with it. Started to realize that, hey, maybe this was the best thing that I could have done for myself. And looking back at it all, 15 years later, it 100% was. But I think it was because I made it so.
Yeah.
because I could have gone complete other route, 110%. In fact, I did go that route for a little while. I did look at my life through the lens of why me, or I can't believe this happened to me. And then I started to look at that whole energy that I was projecting onto other people by choosing to look at myself through that lens. And I realized that I don't want to do that. There was nothing empowering about that. There was no opportunities to find new meaning. And I mean, look, many of us, whatever that number looks like, I believe when we're born, we're dealt a hand that we don't have control over. But I think the beauty of life moving forward, and this is something I believe in, I believe that deck is always available to me. And I can always go back to it and reshuffle those cards. So what that I was born to, X, Y, and Z circumstances. It doesn't mean that I have to live with them for the rest of my life. I can change it. I can change how I look at them.
And I think your story is just, it's remarkable to me, your mindset at such a young age to say, okay, to recognize I need to make this change. Because a lot of people, they wait and they just wait and ride it out. But the fact that you were proactive so young, I think speaks volumes to you. And then how was the transition like from living with your mother, living with your family to now you're in an orphanage?
That was a very challenging transition. It was a challenging transition because the concept of family shifted drastically. The caregivers all of a sudden became the parents. The kids surrounding me became brothers and sisters. But yet there was no trust that I had developed with any of them.
Yeah.
It was almost like being thrown into a box and you got to figure it out. You got to figure out how you're going to make friends. You have to figure out how you're going to be perceived. You have to figure out how you're going to be accepted, what belonging looks like for you. And it was a challenge. It was a challenge for the first couple of months to maybe a year to really find that sense of acceptance. My identity shifted drastically. I mean, I remember there were certain moments within that journey where I didn't know if I was going to make it. My only hope truly was whenever we were told to go to bed at 9 or 10 p.m., I would climb on the windowsill and I would write poetry with whatever light was available through the window just to help me process everything I was going through. I was losing hope. It's like for anyone else that can relate, it's a difficult space to be in when you lose hope.
Yeah.
It's a difficult space to be in when I was confronted with that understanding that, man, things may not work out.
Yeah. And then from there, you, well, actually, folk singing.
Yeah.
That's something you got into, right?
Yeah.
And that was instrumental in getting you to the States. Am I correct?
It was.
Okay.
It was. So I think it was in the end of first year, going on to second year at the orphanage. One of the things that we were required to do was be a part of some sort of music related activities. Whether it was dancing, singing, playing the piano, or some form of instrument. I somehow naturally gravitated towards singing. I have no idea how. That's, in fact, if there's any question that's still left unanswered, it's that one. I don't know anyone within my family who had a voice, who actively practiced it, but I just gravitated towards it. And next thing I know is my teacher and I were putting together these small lessons. She's composing on the side while I'm actually singing whatever the songs were. And then she starts writing music for me. And then we start to sew together costumes. And next thing I know is that we're performing. Not in the classroom anymore, but competing amongst other schools, orphanages. I remember the prizes I was winning at the time, like flip camera, bicycles. I mean, to me, it felt like $1 million.
Yeah.
I never won anything like that before. And that's when I realized that there was something unique within this. It was almost like a hidden gift that I had. And I started to tap into it more. and become a lot more persistent, took it a lot more seriously. In fact, the school that I attended at the time, they had a music class. And so I signed up for that just to get additional practice and exposure. And so after a while, what I realized was I was becoming kind of like the spotlight in the classroom, at the orphanage, when it came to that particular thing. And due to all the competitions and exposure, I think what ended up happening was somehow that adoption agency in Michigan had found our name. And the next thing I know was that we received a letter from that adoption agency saying, hey, if you guys can put together a group of kids, we'll fly you here. You will stay with your hopefully soon to be parents for the 2 weeks, almost like an exchange program in a way.
Yeah.
And so we ended up coming here. Once again, didn't speak any English, didn't know anything about this part of the world. Was 11 years old at the time, complete culture shock. But was very fortunate that it turned into something, that it turned into an opportunity after I left. After I left the States and came back to Russia before the adoption officially took place, we had a couple of hiccups in our paperwork. So the adoption initially was supposed to process within a couple months. I think it ended up taking a year and a half. And that feeling of hope and what do you hang on to, it began to reappear again. Everything was in question once again. You might not get adopted. You might be stuck here. You might just have to think about what your next steps are after graduating from school. And I started to realize, looking back at all of it now through who I am today, there was an important element that the environment played. Environment plays a just huge element, I believe, in who you can become. Because in that particular case at the orphanage, when I was not believing in the fact of the adoption even taking place, because there were so many obstacles along the way, and I was losing hope, many of the people surrounding me were experiencing the same thing. Prior to it, everyone was commenting, saying, hey, look at that beautiful American smile. Can't wait for you to be adopted. Because I think people wanted me to leave on the best possible impression. I don't think people actually wanted me to remember the times they abused me or did the different things to me. So when the process prolonged, things started to go back to normal, how they were. I was no longer put on a pedestal. I was no longer given special attention. I was viewed just like any other kid, or I was starting to. And unfortunately enough, the adoption did go through, and I was able to come to the States in 2005, towards the end of the year, and then start this next journey, which had its own set of challenges, very difficult challenges. Coming here, being put in the middle of sixth grade, not speaking the language well, and yet having to figure out the best way that I can explain to people how I understand the education system in the United States. It is, when I was in sixth grade, I wasn't actually in sixth grade. I was preparing for eighth. When I was in ninth grade, I wasn't actually in ninth grade. I was preparing for college. When you enter college, the question that you get asked is, what do you want to do for a living? So you're not really in college. You're already approaching life through a completely different lens. So it's more real than the circumstances are. And that was another challenge, was being put in a system that is truly accelerated learning across the board. Not only the language, but every other subject. Relationships. Think about how fast, I actually didn't even think about this until recently, but think about how fast your relationship change. Middle school, you're given what, 2 or 3 years?
Yeah.
High school, 4 years. College, 4 years. But all of those transitions, the chances of you maintaining the same friendships in the form that they are, or they were, is very slim. Because not everyone goes to the same high school.
Yeah.
Not everyone goes to the same college. So at every one of those stages, I had found myself being put in a position where My foundation was being rebuilt every single time. Now I have to find a new group of friends. Now I have to find new ways to fit in, to be accepted. And part of that journey included for me, at least when I went into high school, was being part of groups of friends that I didn't fully align with. But I just had to be part of them, because if I wasn't, well, where do I belong? Where am I accepted? The whole concept of loving myself and accepting myself and knowing that I'm enough was a foreign language back then. I felt that I needed other people's validation to give me that meaning, to help me understand that, yes, I do belong in this world. I had to be part of a group. So it put me in circumstances and situations where I was part of groups that I didn't ultimately want to be a part of. But then the other part was, if you're not a part of them, well, then you're part of no groups. Then what do you do?
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of kids, I know I struggled with it when I went through high school.
Yeah.
You have to be in a clique. And I think it's interesting what you said too about the foundation having to be reset every single stage. And then, that is honestly the truth. It's high school, go to college, new foundation, new career. And every time you start a new career, new relationships, that foundation starts right back over again. It's a very interesting way of putting it.
The other thing that I'll add to that before we go on to the next topic, but this whole concept of foundation and starting over and just embracing the unknown. In fact, that's one of your rapid fire questions. It was a challenging concept for me to accept. And the reason why is because I was craving stability. I was craving security. I was craving comfort. Because when I went through all the transitions that I have, I wanted to experience the opposite side of that. What does it mean to not have to go from one place to another? Depend on one person compared to the one that you had. And the friend groups, it's actually an interesting concept, because one of the things that I had found myself in, especially in high school, was because I was able to experience so many different spectrums. I was the kid that was the bully, but I was also the kid that was bullied. I was able to connect to every single kid in the school. In fact, to this day, I remember having conversations with kids who were bullied every single day. I'd sit down with them. We was at computer class. The teacher's name, his name was Michael Smith. And them and I would just sit down next to each other and talk. I didn't even think about that in that moment. Like, not only how did they perceive me, because here I am talking to them and relating to them. And next day, I'm the opposite side of that. I'm with my group of friends, bullying them, packing their lockers with gum or whatever the thing was back then. But it just, for me, what it made me understand was that at the core of who I was I was a good person. I was a good person, and that's where I started to believe that my circumstances don't define me. I believe that many, if not all of us, have been in situations where we've either been bullied or been a bully to someone else.
Yeah.
How can you know the difference if you haven't experienced the other end?
Yeah. Talk about foreshadowing, sitting people down, talking to them and seeing what you're doing here today. Yeah. I thought Shay Sparks brought up a phenomenal point when we were talking on here about hurt people.
Mm-hmm.
And kids just are struggling so much with that. And that's where kids are just cruel. Can be so cruel to each other.
Because they're so honest.
Yeah.
There's no filter.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember one of the first times I wrote about this recently. I was in middle school, and one of my friends at the time, we were just playing at the playground, and he had said, "They're not your real parents," about my adoptive parents.
Yeah.
Now, at the time, I was completely heartbroken, and I couldn't even think of the next word to say or what comeback to use. And even though in most situations I was able to quickly think of a joke and kind of flip it around, but that one, it caught me off guard completely. In fact, I stood there and I was speechless. I didn't even know what to say. Now, to a degree, maybe there's a grain of truth to that,
Yeah.
as far as those parents did not give me birth. But what makes a real parent anyway? Is it someone who cares for you, loves you, supports you? They did and continue to do all three of those.
Checked all those boxes.
So in a way, they are real parents. But back then, there was just so many remarks, and I've said certain things as well to people that I'm sure have hurt them. And if there's anything that I could look back at my past, it is that I believe that there's a chapter for everything. There was a chapter when I was that bully. There was a chapter when I was bullied. There was a chapter now that I'm choosing to do something about those experiences. So that's how I started to approach life. Yeah. Chapters.
Oh, you got an amazing chapter that you're writing right now with Overcoming Odds. I was reading something that said that within weeks of launching your website, and I'll let you tell our viewers everything about it, but you received over hundreds of stories from people all over the world who were adopted internationally. So tell our audience about Overcoming Odds and all the amazing things you're doing with that.
So this was a concept I started in 2017, and the vision, what I wanted to have for it at the time, was I wanted to create a space for other adoptees and foster youth to be able to share their own experiences, the good, the bad, and everything in between. And the reason why I wanted to do that is because as I was having conversations with different child welfare related organizations at the time, I'd realized that the only focus for them, not all, but some, was only the success stories. And then I started to question myself, like, well, what about the other side? And in fact, I asked some of the people, I said, what about the experiences that didn't work out? Oh, we'll tell the parents if they ask. So there are two things that you're banking on or assuming. A, parents know that they're horrific experiences. And B, the parents have the courage to ask that question. So I wanted to eliminate that completely. I wanted to create a space where you can share all sides of the story and not focus on one. Because that's what life is. Life is not only the bright spots, life is also a ton of dark spots, a ton of days when I'm doubting myself, when the fear is a real thing and not only a thought. So once I launched that, I remember I launched it just with my own story. In fact, true story. Right before I launched it, I considered applying for a job. I didn't actually I wasn't even starting Overcoming Odds.
Navy SEALs.
It's going straight for Navy SEALs. No, I was applying for a job or an internship in Austin, Texas at an organization. I think it's called Miracle Foundation. And I was completing their cover letter and everything. And there was a question in there that said, describe who you are. And that's what kind of triggered for me. And so I started to write the story. This was about 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning. And the person I was dating at the time, I came back to her and I said, hey, can you proofread this and stuff? And she was reading this, and literally we copied and pasted the whole thing, exited out of that window, pasted the story into a Word doc, and I started to write my story. I just started to write my own story. I started to put it together. And then within probably hours of that, this program I was a part of, I had talked to the founder and I said, hey, I think I'm onto something here. I think there's something within my experience that I can actually build off of and create this space. And so I remember in the days leading up to it, I would sit at different coffee shops and think about different names. One of the things I did is pulled out a sheet of paper and I wrote on one side all the different things like overcoming, storytelling, reframing, and then on the other side, another set of words. And then I would try and cross match and see like what sounds good, what fits in. And I think it was towards the end or maybe in the middle, I had come across that concept, overcoming odds. And as soon as I said it, there was something that just made sense. It's like, that's what your life has been. It's about finding ways to overcome whatever the odds have been and the obstacles. And that's where I really chose to share that story. And I shared the story. I shared the blog post within a couple groups, Facebook groups that I was a part of. And literally within hours, people started to reach out. Hey, me too. How do I become a part of this? How do I share my story? And people started to share their experiences. And then I started to reshare their stories, and more people started to share. Now, it was an interesting experience because it was my first real exposure to negative feedback. Because some people who were sharing successful stories or positive stories and know that those that didn't experience them would comment things like, well, my experience was not like this, and how could this person ever say X, Y, and Z? And that's where I realized that, okay, I have a choice here. I can either respond with the same tone of energy, or I can flip the script completely. And I can approach it from a place of curiosity. I can start asking the person the question of, why do you feel the way that you do? What has your experience been like? And one of the things that I've learned was, in most cases, after 10 to 20 different exchanges, literally the person ended up saying, I'm sorry. And that's where I realized that I just happened to be an outlet for them to process their experience. And that's where this concept, and that's what it has become today, is I genuinely believe it's a place for people to be seen, to be heard, and to be appreciated. And the reason why I believe that is because, in my opinion, I think there are very few places in this world that provide such opportunity for people to really express who they are, what they've been through, what they've learned, what they know, what they don't know about life. And that's where my, I guess you could say, demographic for this work expanded. It was no longer adoption and foster care. It was people. It was people who have faced hardship in their lives. Which, to a degree, if you really think about it, it's probably every single person on this planet that has faced some form of hardship or is bound to face something. So that's where I started to tune into this concept of, okay, how do I create a space where people can not only show up to share their story, but share their story in a way of, what did they learn from it? What did it teach you? So what that you went through bankruptcy? What did you learn from that? Or so what that you're about to file for a divorce? What can you take away from this relationship into the next one?
If people would like to hear more, then go to overcomingodds.today. Is that correct?
Today.
Yeah. Go over there and check it out. The website's, very well put together, very easy to navigate through. I was going through there, especially the past couple of weeks that I've been connected with Oleg. I was going through there and trying to scroll. You get lost in there. It's just so much good stuff to read. It really is. And I thought you brought up something else too. You were talking about the dealing with the negativity and flipping the script. And it's funny you say that, because that's one thing we've learned to do in professional military education is you get the saltiest people in there, and it's okay. I totally hear you. Why do you feel that way? What are you going to do about it? And you're right. It works. You get down to the core of why they are so hurt, so bitter, so upset. So it's, that's good stuff.
This is what my experience has taught me, is that it's easier to point the finger on someone else than to point the finger on yourself.
Yep.
And that's something that I'm learning right now, is choosing to take greater accountability of my own self rather than blaming anyone else for the things that may or may not have happened to me. So if certain things aren't working out, if certain goals aren't becoming the reality just yet, it all boils down to my actions. There's nothing that you're doing wrong or right. You're just being there. You're sharing who you are. And that has been something that is a daily practice for me, is honestly looking myself in the mirror and asking myself the question of, who do I want to become? It's been as simple as that.
Yeah.
And then choosing to take action every single day towards that version. I wasn't always like this. There were times when I did blame other people for my own dreams and aspirations. I can't believe this hasn't happened yet. Why hasn't this person, manifested it for me? You're in control of your destiny. I'm a huge believer of that. I firmly believe that whatever it is that you aspire in creating, it starts with you and it ends with you.
Yeah.
Everything in between, yes, connections and other people and resources, like, they may play a role, but you have to decide.
Yeah. You and I were just talking about this on your podcast about how ultimately you make the decisions for you. Others can influence it. They can, guide you in a certain direction, but you are the one that ultimately makes that decision. So couple of last questions here for you. What is it that drives you intrinsically still to this day?
Knowing that I'm more than my circumstances, knowing that I'm not defined by them. Not only the circumstances of my past, as in distant childhood, but also the circumstances of yesterday, circumstances of the last hour. Those are just events that happen the way that they did, and I have a choice in how I look at them. So that has been a great reminder for me, is understanding that I'm so much more than my circumstances. As you mentioned, they may shape, they may influence the person I become, but I still have a choice.
Yeah.
I have a choice in how I view those circumstances and which of those I choose to implement on and actually act on. That's where I think for me, once I changed the narrative and it became that, my world shifted. I mean, it changed completely. I kid you not. Now, disclaimer, this didn't happen overnight. This took, I don't know however many years, at least 8 that I can recall. When awareness clicked in, and I was very fortunate to start becoming an observer of life and how certain things were happening. But that has been a really big thing for me, is that yes, I might have been dealt X, Y, and Z hand when I was born, but it doesn't have to be the hand that I hold today.
Yeah. It just kind of clicks at some point.
Yeah.
I've been asked the same question. I'm like, I can't really pinpoint it. It just kind of
It makes
clicks for you.
sense.
Yeah.
It's like once you know, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no reason to even explain it.
Yeah.
It just makes sense to you in a way that you don't even have to justify.
Yeah.
Why does it work the way that it does?
Another thing about you, I've been drawn to your positivity that you have and spreading goodness out there to everybody. How have you stayed positive during this pandemic?
I looked at it as a learning opportunity. I started to look at all of this as far as what can you teach me?
Yeah.
So my story has been, when a pandemic hit, I think it was March 8th to be exact.
Yep.
I had multiple engagements on during the first month of April, May, might have been June as well, where I was going to travel to many of these places, California, New York, and speak at some of the colleges. And everything got canceled. Everything got canceled within a matter of hours. I received cancellation emails. So the first thing that I did is I definitely shed a tear. It's like, wow, here goes thousands and thousands of emails. Just all canceled within just a matter of a click. But then I started to look at it through the lens of, well, what am I going to do about it? What can I learn from it? And that's what I realized was, when I started to look at it through that lens of what is it here to teach me, new opportunities started to open up. I found industries I didn't even know I could serve in, hospitals being one of them. I didn't even know I could add value to a demographic like that. And yet, some of the people that I was having conversations with on our podcast were nurses. But I was so centered on thinking that, hey, I can only add value to X, Y, and Z demographic, that I wasn't realizing that the reason why some of these individuals who were nurses and other professionals who were working in the hospital industry were reaching out to me is because there's probably an experience that I'm able to connect with them around. So that's when my scope started to expand even more. So being open-minded, it's such an interesting journey to be on, because for me at least, there's no clear-cut way to be in it. It's not only about what am I not seeing, because how do you find that thing that you're not seeing? How do you actually articulate that? How do you understand? It's trying to know something that you don't know. How do you do that? So for me, it was just really approaching it through that lens. Yes, this is happening, but what can I do about it? Don't get me wrong, there were challenges along the way for sure.
Yeah.
there were situations where I had to ask other people for help, family and friends. But then I just realized that, hey, maybe this is just part of the journey.
Yeah.
Maybe this is part of the story that you're meant to write. And you write in your book every single day. I'm a huge believer of that. It's not only when it's a finished, tangible copy. Your life is your book. Your story is your book. Your experiences are your chapters, and you are the author. And that's where I started to realize that, man, yes, I'm going through these circumstances and they might be challenging, but there's something beautiful on the other side or even during it. And that's I'm learning something I didn't already know.
Yeah, I've said that I think that people could have gone one or two ways with this. Some have looked at it and said, wow, I've been able to do so much and learn and pick up a new trade or find a new hobby or something. And then some, like you were talking about earlier, it's easier to point the finger and say, oh, this card's been dealt. I can't believe this has happened. For me, 2020 has been a phenomenal year. It's been a great year for me personally. And all the connections like this that I've been able to make. I would not have probably made this connection with you if it would not have been for everything that was dealt.
A friend of mine had actually shared this thing that I'll share with you, and that is, she said 2020 is like perfect vision.
Yeah.
You get to define your vision. In 2021, you get to act upon that vision. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, that is genius.
So perfect.
It truly is. 2020, perfect vision.
Yeah.
Perfect opportunity for you to narrow down on what your vision is.
Yeah. I've joked with people. I said that someone spills their Starbucks coffee, and now that 2020 has become like the excuse for anything bad that happens in life. It's like, oh, I spilled this coffee. 2020 got me again. Oh my gosh. But I like that view. I like that view. Last thing to ask you, what's next for you?
What's next for me is finishing writing my book. There's a book that's going to be coming out called The Power of Your Story. And it really focuses on me telling my own story, but ultimately, what did I learn from it? So that is the next chapter of my life. And that my intention with that is to get into schools, colleges, universities, hospitals, child welfare organizations, military. So I think this concept of resilience, but so much more than that. It's really just seeking depth in the experiences that life gives me an opportunity to go through, and choosing to look at it through the lens of not only what did it teach me, but what can I learn from it? What am I grateful for? Why do certain things happen the way they do? So that is my next chapter. That's my next chapter, is putting it into a tangible form and being able to share my experiences with other people.
Sir, I appreciate you taking time to do this. This was an awesome experience, sitting here getting to talk to you. Any last words for our listeners?
The one thing that I would say, and this is a quote that I've read by Henry Ford, he said, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're right. Yeah. So whatever the goal, whatever the vision, whatever the project that you aspire to tackle in your life, think about that phrase. Whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're right.
I like it.
It's all a mindset.
Yeah. Well, thank you for taking time for being here with us today and spending some time with us. You got a remarkable story. Cannot wait to hear more about that book. When the book's going to be released, let us know. We'll definitely promote it on our pages and get that out there to our listeners. So thank you for taking time for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on.